The coffee cup trembled in Ashley's hands. 0600 hours. The St. Michael's break room was empty except for the fluorescent hum overhead and the smell of burnt coffee from yesterday's pot. She stood at the window overlooking Norfolk, her fingers wrapped around the ceramic like she was holding something that might shatter, and she didn't trust the tremor that had started somewhere in her chest at 0530 when the alarm on her encrypted phone buzzed once. Operation Shepherd Glass. Activate. 18 months of cover built on 3 things: a nursing license that was absolutely real, hands that could place and 4 blindfolded, and the ability to walk into a pediatric ward without anyone knowing she'd carried a wounded man 2 miles through Taliban fire with bullets punching through trees above her head. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The kind that comes from muscle memory screaming at her to move, to execute, to do something other than stand in a hospital break room holding a coffee cup. She breathed. 4 counts in. Hold for 7. Out for 8. Combat breathing. The medics had taught her that before the deployments, back when she was still Captain Ashley Cooper with a live call sign and a unit patch that meant something on forward operating bases where the dust never settled and the radio never went silent. Now she was just a nurse. The patch was sewn inside her jacket lining, faded from 3 tours, hidden like contraband. The hands that had performed emergency field thoracotomies in Kandahar were now documented, fingerprinted, credentialed to take blood pressure from children who couldn't see their own faces in mirrors anymore. The briefing file had been crystal clear. 7-year-old Marcus Voss. Only child. Sudden onset blindness following his father's deployment-redeployment complications. Classified intelligence implications. The Navy needed someone embedded in his medical care. Someone who could monitor his condition, document the neurological markers, and feed data up the chain without raising flags. Someone who could disappear into a hospital system and become invisible. Ashley Cooper fit that profile perfectly. Because Ashley Cooper had already learned how to disappear. She finished the coffee, rinsed the cup, and clocked in at 0627. Her badge photo showed a woman with her hair pulled back tight, no makeup, eyes that gave nothing away. The credentials were impeccable. Virginia Board of Nursing license. Clean background check scrubbed by people in Arlington who specialized in scrubbing backgrounds. Letters of recommendation from 3 hospital systems she'd never worked at, written by people who didn't exist. The hospital system had hired her in December without a single question. Nursing shortage. Pediatric specialty. References checked out. Done. The pediatric wing of St. Michael's smelled like vanilla air freshener and antiseptic with something underneath that the air freshener never quite covered, the smell of fear, the kind that parents brought in their clothes and their breath when they realized their children's bodies could fail them. Ashley moved through it like she was breathing normal air, her shoes silent on linoleum, her movements precise in a way that her cover story explained as attention to detail and her real history explained as years of moving through spaces where sound meant death. Marcus Voss was in room 312, 3rd door on the left. Ashley had memorized the floor plan 3 days before her shift started. 3 nurses on this shift, 2 doctors, 1 resident doing rounds. She knew their names, their habits, their schedule down to the minute. The intelligence community called it situational awareness. Her therapist would probably call it something else. Marcus was awake, sitting up in the pediatric bed with its safety rails and cartoon decorations that were supposed to feel welcoming to kids. They felt like cages. The boy's eyes were open but tracking nothing, pupils dilating and contracting with mechanical precision. No saccades. No tracking reflex. No response to light stimulus. Confirmed blindness. The neural pathways were shutting down in sequence. Somewhere between the optical nerve and the visual cortex, something was dying. "Good morning, Marcus," Ashley said, and her voice came out soft, deferential, the way the cover story required. "I'm going to check your for this morning, okay? Just going to make sure it's running smoothly." The boy's head turned toward her voice. His small hands reached out, grasping toward the sound the way blind children learn to do, the way evolution teaches you to orient toward threats or help when your primary sense goes dark. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. His voice was thin, the voice of a child who'd cried so much in the past weeks that his vocal cords hadn't fully recovered. "Ashley," she said. She reached for his full line, fingers steady as surgical lasers, placing her hand near his so he could feel her presence without the reaching becoming a panic search. "Your dad called me yesterday." That was the mission cover. Commander Bradley Voss had contacted St. Michael's Pediatrics requesting Ashley Cooper specifically. The request had come through official channels. Everything documented. Everything explainable. What nobody documented was that Commander Voss had whispered her call sign into the phone when she'd answered, Angel 6, the name he'd gasped into her shoulder during that 2-mile carry when her arms were burning and his blood was soaking through her combat fatigues, and there was nothing between them and the Taliban gunfire except geometry and luck and the kind of determination that gets people killed or makes them legends. Did he? Marcus's face brightened. Not joy, something more fragile. Hope. The kind children offer to anyone who's connected to the person they're losing. "When's Dad coming home?" "I don't know, buddy," Ashley said, and that was true. The briefing documents had been redacted on those points. Commander Voss's post-deployment status was classified, his movements restricted, his presence in Norfolk itself part of the operation parameters she wasn't fully cleared for. What she knew was that his son was slowly going blind, that 7 different specialists had documented the progression as neurologically inexplicable, and that Marcus's condition had intelligence implications significant enough to activate a naval intelligence embed. She checked the 4-flow, normal saline, 10 milliliters per hour, pediatric drip rate. The port was clean, dressing intact, no signs of infiltration. She made notes on the tablet, logging vitals, documenting his response to voice stimulus, recording the precise pupil measurements that would get uploaded to a classified database somewhere in Arlington that she'd never see but knew existed. The information was flowing. The mission was executing. Marcus Voss was alive and monitored and documented in real time by a woman trained in combat medicine, human intelligence gathering, and the particular art of disappearing into institutional systems. She touched the jacket hanging in her locker during the shift change. She'd done it every single morning since she arrived. The patch was there, sewn inside the lining with thread that had held through 3 tours of dust and blood and missions that existed in the space between classified and forgotten. 2nd Marine Division. The unit that had trained her before the Navy borrowed her for things nobody talked about. Before she'd become the kind of person who could carry a wounded commander through Taliban territory and pretend it had never happened. "You're good at this," one of the other nurses said, watching Ashley check Marcus's neurological responses with the kind of systematic precision that looked like caring and actually was, but not the kind of caring that showed up in job descriptions. "Years of practice," Ashley said. Another truth that was technically false. The observation window on the pediatric wing looked out over the main corridor. Ashley was checking Marcus's pupils for the 3rd time. Documentation required baseline measurements every 6 hours when Dr. Mercer arrived. She didn't look up immediately. Looking up too quickly meant you were aware of his presence. Looking up too slowly meant you'd been trained not to flinch. She waited exactly 3 beats, then raised her eyes. He was moving through the hallway with the particular stride of a man who'd never doubted his authority. Italian shoes. Expensive watch. The kind of jacket that announced itself before the man wearing it did. His chart review had been thorough. He'd already called ahead to get copies of every note, every observation, every piece of documentation that Ashley had submitted in the 2 weeks since she'd started. His eyes found her through the observation glass. Dark eyes. Calculating. The kind of eyes that had learned to see weakness in other people and capitalize on it. His gaze tracked from her face to her hands to the way she was holding the penlight. She watched his jaw tighten imperceptibly. He turned and walked toward the nurse's station. It wasn't a coincidence that he was reviewing pediatric cases this morning. The briefing documents had indicated that someone would begin attempting to gain access to Marcus Voss's medical records. They'd flagged the probability at 87% that pressure would come through hospital administration rather than direct inquiry. The intelligence community had been very clear: expect resistance. Expect it to escalate. Expect someone on staff to be either compromised or motivated enough to ask questions about the blind child with the Navy SEAL father and the inexplicable neurological condition. Dr. Mercer was asking questions. She could see it in the way he spread Marcus's chart on the counter and began photographing individual pages with the kind of casual methodology that suggested practice. Nobody just pulled random pediatric charts. Everyone pulled specific ones. And everyone had reasons that had nothing to do with patient care. Ashley finished her rounds and documented the final vitals. She would need to report this to the intelligence liaison. She would need to escalate the observation. She would need to do 17 things before her shift ended at 14:30, including maintaining her cover as the deferential, competent nurse who never questioned authority and certainly never noticed when that authority began moving against her. The thing nobody understood about deep cover was that it wasn't lonely. Loneliness implied emotion. Deep cover was mathematical. You were a function, not a person. You had parameters and objectives and classified directives that superseded everything else. Marcus Voss needed protection. Dr. Mercer was becoming a variable that threatened the operation. Ashley Cooper was a nurse with excellent reviews, clean credentials, and steady hands. The fact that those hands had held lives together in Kandahar was irrelevant. The fact that those hands were trembling with the effort of not acting was something she would manage alone, in a break room where nobody watched, with a technique they'd taught her before the first deployment. For counts in. Hold for 7. Out for 8. She had a job to do. And nothing, not protocol, not pride, not a man in Italian shoes moving through the pediatric ward with predatory precision, was going to stop her from doing it. The conference room hummed with the fluorescent buzz of institutional authority. 17 medical residents and students occupied the tiered seats, their notepads ready, their eyes fixed on the projection screen where Ashley Cooper's charting blazed in magnified digital judgment. Dr. Mercer stood center stage, Italian loafers polished to mirror shine, his laser pointer tracing circles around her notations with the precision of a prosecutor marking evidence. The antiseptic smell of the room, bleach and old coffee and dry-cleaned wool, seemed to thicken as he began. This, Mercer announced, his voice pitched for maximum theatrical effect, represents substandard documentation practices. Nurse Cooper apparently believes she's preparing for litigation rather than patient care. He circled another entry. Note the excessive detail. The paranoid over-recording. The defensive notation of every conversation, every observation, every clinical decision. The laser pointer trembled slightly, not from Mercer's hand, but from the intensity of his performance. Perhaps our friend Clipboard Kathy here missed the efficiency modules in nursing school. The laughter came immediately, automatic as a reflex. A tall resident in the back row, fresh-faced, eager to please the attending, laughed loudest. Ashley stood against the back wall, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression carved from granite. Her badge hung at her hip, catching light. Her scrubs were precisely creased. Her eyes tracked Mercer with the detached interest of someone watching weather patterns through a window. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't even shift her weight. Mercer waited for a reaction, a flush, a defensive word, a tremor in the shoulders. He was hunting for emotional blood in the water. What he found instead was stillness so complete that it began to feel like a rebuke. His smile tightened at the edges. He moved on to the next slide, but his momentum had fractured. Ashley remained motionless, watching him with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived far worse than a man in Italian shoes with a laser pointer. The vending machines occupied the fourth-floor alcove near the stairwell, a fluorescent-lit pocket of the hospital where staff traded gossip and caffeine like currency. Ashley had been a regular here for 18 months, a ghost in scrubs, invisible to most, noticed by almost none. At 1,400 hours, exactly 1 hour after the Grand Round's humiliation, she pressed the button for coffee, D4. The machine hummed and hissed, dropping a paper cup and filling it with dark liquid that smelled like burnt rubber. Dr. Mercer appeared in her peripheral vision with 2 attending physicians, Dr. Rahman and Dr. Keiko, both surgeons, both men who had never acknowledged Ashley beyond the bare minimum required by professional courtesy. Mercer's voice found its public register, loud enough to carry down the hallway, the tone of a man performing for an invisible audience. "I'm genuinely curious, Cooper," Mercer said, making no effort to lower his volume. "Did you actually pass your state boards, or did Norfolk Regional have some kind of diversity quota situation to fill?" Dr. Rahman snickered, a small, bitter sound like a barking seal. "Because I'm looking at your credentials right now, and something doesn't add up. In fact, I'm thinking we need security to escort you directly to HR. Have you produced your actual licenses? Documentation? Everything? End of shift." He paused, letting the threat settle. "Because if you can't produce them, if they're problematic, there's no way this hospital can keep you on staff." Ashley's coffee finished dispensing. She reached down, retrieved the cup, and her jaw tightened exactly 1 millimeter, the kind of micro-expression a trained observer might catch, a normal person would miss entirely. Her fingers didn't shake around the paper cup. She didn't turn to face them. She pressed the button for D7, orange juice, steady rotation through hydration options, and waited while the machine processed the request. The mechanical whir of the dispenser became the loudest sound in the alcove. When the juice dropped, she took it, turned with deliberate calm, and walked past the 3 physicians without making eye contact. Her voice, when she spoke, came out flat as pavement. "I'll have them for you." She disappeared around the corner toward the pediatric wing. That evening, Marcus's room held the particular quality of light that comes just after sunset in a hospital. Outside the windows, the world turning purple-blue; inside, the steady amber glow of monitors and bedside lamps. The boy lay propped on 3 pillows, his bandaged eyes making him look smaller than 7 years old, more fragile. Ashley was changing his intravenous line when Dr. Mercer entered without knocking, the kind of violation that announced rank without words. "The Voss case is being reassigned," Mercer said, not greeting, not preamble. "Effective immediately. You're too emotionally attached. Making poor clinical judgments. I'm documenting that you questioned my treatment protocol in front of the family yesterday." He pulled out his phone, making notes with 2 aggressive thumbs. "Insubordination. That's going in your file." Ashley's hands kept moving with mechanical precision, disconnecting the old line, flushing the port, attaching the new bag of saline with its gradient drip rate. Her voice emerged controlled, measured, the voice of someone reciting a fact. "I asked a clarifying question about the dosage of the experimental compound. That's not insubordination. That's standard practice. You questioned my medical judgment in front of a family member. That is insubordination." Mercer's voice had taken on the quality of a man building a case, each sentence another brick in a wall. "That's write-up number 3 this month. One more incident, one more flag in your file, and you're terminated. I wonder if you'll even make it to one more incident, actually. I have a feeling something will come up. Something significant." He left before she could respond, and his departure felt like a closing door, not gentle, but final. Marcus whispered into the post-silence, his small voice carrying the weight of observations only children can make with innocence. "Miss Ashley, why is he so mean to you?" Ashley's hand stilled for the first time that day. She finished securing the 4-line, stepped back to check the drip rate, 12 milliliters per hour, steady pulse of clear fluid into the boy's vein, and then she smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead with a tenderness that seemed to come from someplace deeper than professionalism. For 3 seconds, her hand trembled. Not from fear. From restraint. "Some people are just scared, sweetie," she said, and that was the truth in a smaller form, a truth she could give a child without explaining the full landscape of what frightened men like Mercer. After her shift ended at 2,100 hours, Ashley should have gone home to her studio apartment in the Norfolk Harbor district, the one with the view of the naval base where SEAL Team 3 ran early morning PT on the beach, where occasionally she could see distant silhouettes moving through darkness with practiced precision. Instead, she took the back stairs to the sub-basement, her badge keycarding her through the door marked medical records, staff only, and settled into the climate-controlled silence of the hospital archive. The Voss file was easy to locate. Mercer had made it easy, filing documentation with the kind of obsessive precision that betrays obsession. 18 months of treatment notes. Lab work. Imaging studies. Specialist consultations. And then, in the financial section, the pattern that made everything else collapse into terrible clarity. Ashley photographed each page with a cell phone that fed directly to Naval Intelligence's classified server. Her hands moved with combat efficiency: document, photograph, return, next page, while her mind worked the numbers. Marcus's experimental treatment had been billed to 3 separate insurance carriers simultaneously. The primary insurance claim, $487,000. The secondary insurance claim, $312,000. The tertiary research grant fund, $198,000. The same procedures, the same medications, the same hospitalization codes, billed 3 separate ways to 3 separate pairs, all of it funneling back through accounts that Mercer controlled. Triple dipping. Insurance fraud. And each fraudulent claim required Marcus to undergo unnecessary procedures to justify the billing. A child's blindness being harvested like a resource, his optic nerve inflammation converted into a revenue stream. She photographed 7 other files, pediatric patients under Mercer's care, all with similar patterns, all with billing irregularities that formed a constellation of fraud. A 13-year-old with acute lymphoblastic leukemia whose chemotherapy protocol was being extended beyond clinical benefit because the extended treatment generated exponentially more billing. A 9-year-old with a lower spinal cord injury who was being kept in the hospital for research observation that had no medical justification but significant financial justification. The data accumulated like evidence at a crime scene, each page another piece of the architecture that Mercer had built. At 0400 hours, alone in the records room, Ashley called her handler. Commander Patricia Vance answered on the first ring, not because she didn't sleep, but because she'd been waiting for this exact call. "Mercer's accelerating," Ashley said without preamble. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it had changed. "He's building a termination file on me because I'm documenting too carefully. He knows I'm seeing the billing patterns, and he's trying to get me out before I have enough evidence." On the encrypted line, Vance's voice came through like a radio transmission. "Can you last another month? We need airtight evidence for the FBI. 7 cases minimum. Corroboration from a second party." Ashley thought about Marcus's small hand reaching out to touch her face in the darkness, tracing features he couldn't see. She thought about the SEAL commander who walked past her in the hallway each morning, whose forearm bore her name in black ink, who had no idea his 7-year-old son was being used as a billing vehicle. She thought about 18 months of intelligence work that could evaporate in the time it took Mercer to sign a termination letter. "I'll last as long as Marcus needs me to," she said. The next morning, Dr. Mercer called her to his office, a space decorated in aggressive minimalism, the kind of environment where important people made decisions that affected less important people. He presented a 43-page document bound in hospital blue, its title emblazoned across the cover, Performance Improvement Plan, a Nurse Ashley Cooper. The document required daily supervisor sign-offs, weekly competency assessments, and constant documentation of every clinical decision. It was a machine designed to generate failure, a mechanism that transformed normal clinical work into a minefield of potential violations. It was, Ashley recognized immediately, a termination plan disguised as an improvement strategy. "You have 2 weeks to meet these metrics," Mercer said, not offering her a chair, making her stand while he explained her diminishment. "I've also reassigned you from the Voss case effective immediately. Nurse Patterson will be taking over his care. I believe the change in continuity will be beneficial for the patient." Ashley read the document in silence. Her face remained composed, carved from something harder than stone. When she looked up, her eyes had changed. Something had shifted behind them, some door that had been partially open now closing itself completely. "Understood," she said. She walked out of his office into the hallway where she passed a tall man in a navy dress uniform, blue jacket, medals arranged in precise ascending order of precedence, face weathered by service and years in desert heat. Commander Bradley Voss, who had no idea that the woman in scrubs who nodded politely at him had carried him 2 miles through Taliban fire with his blood soaking her uniform and his name later inked across his forearm as a permanent thank you. He nodded back, the small acknowledgement between two people who existed in different worlds. But that wasn't the worst part. That evening, the pediatric ward hummed with the low murmur of monitors and distant televisions from other rooms. Marcus sat up in his bed, his small fingers reaching forward into the darkness that had become his entire world, searching for something his mind couldn't quite find. Ashley was changing his full line when he turned toward her, voice, his hands lifting slightly, trembling with the uncertainty of a 7-year-old learning to navigate a world without light. His fingers found her cheek, traced the line of her jaw, moved across her forehead with the careful precision of someone trying to memorize a face he would never see again. She didn't pull away. Her hands continued their work, steady, measured, while his small palms pressed against her skin like he was reading Braille written in scar tissue and experience. "You feel strong," he whispered, his voice carrying the particular clarity of children who see with other senses. "Like Daddy." Strong and sad. Ashley's breathing didn't change. Her heart rate remained exactly where it was. But something in her chest tightened like a fist closing around broken glass. What he didn't know was that she recognized the name he called out during his semi-conscious moments at 0300 hours, when fevered dreams pulled him toward memories that didn't belong to him. "Angel 6, he whispered one night, his voice thick with morphine and childhood confusion. "Angel 6, don't let go. Don't let," the call sign stopped her hands mid-motion. Angel 6. The designation she'd carried through 3 tours of Kandahar. The name Commander Bradley Voss had screamed into a radio while bleeding out in a Taliban ambush, while she was carrying him 2 miles through contact across terrain that wanted him dead. The same commander whose name was now tattooed on his forearm in black letters, the same commander whose 7-year-old son was whispering it back to her in the dark. The boy's mother had died when he was 3, a car accident on Route 58, the kind of sudden that doesn't announce itself. The commander had raised him alone between deployments, and something in that child's voice when he said Angel 6 carried the weight of a father's bedside stories, the kind a man tells a sleeping child about the person who saved his life. Marcus didn't know who she was. But his body remembered her? His subconscious carried her call sign like a password to safety. By that Friday, Dr. Mercer's campaign had evolved beyond public mockery into something far more calculated and dangerous. 3 documentation violations filed in 4 days. Each one technically accurate, a missing timestamp on a glucose log, a procedure note completed 8 minutes after the clock-in showed shift end, but applied with surgical precision only to Ashley's charts, while identical infractions in other nurses' files went unmarked and unsigned. He'd reassigned her morning rotation to the trauma bay, moved her away from the pediatric wing entirely, but every afternoon she found herself reassigned back. Not out of mercy. Out of strategy. He wanted her visible. He wanted her off balance. He wanted her making mistakes born from exhaustion and anger. The worst part wasn't the violations. It was that Mercer was smart about it. Competent. He didn't just yell. He documented. Filed formal complaints through proper channels. Built a paper trail that looked, from the outside, like a doctor concerned about patient safety. When she'd shown up to the morning meeting where he'd intended to present a summary of her pattern of recklessness to the hospital's quality committee, she found herself standing before 3 attending physicians and the nursing director, while Mercer presented a 23-page report that made her look dangerous. Medication errors. Chart inaccuracies. Questionable judgment, he'd said, his voice carrying just the right note of regret, as if he hated being the one to say these things. "I hate doing this. But patient safety comes first." None of it was technically false. All of it was technically irrelevant to the actual quality of her care. But that's how people like Mercer operated, they weaponized the truth itself. She spent that night and the next in the hospital records room from 0200 to 0400 hours, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps, pulling files from the secure server, cross-referencing Marcus's billing against 7 other pediatric neurology cases treated by Mercer in the past 18 months. The pattern was there. Unmissable once you knew how to look for it. Multiple insurance carriers billed for identical procedures on the same dates. Experimental treatments coded to 3 separate carriers simultaneously. Authorization forms that didn't match the procedures performed. Conservative estimate, $400,000 in fraudulent claims. Possibly more. The kind of pattern that triggered federal audit protocols if anyone with authority ever looked carefully. Mercer was stealing from the hospital's insurance pools. More than that, he was stealing from patients' coverage, burning through benefits that should have been available for actual treatment. Marcus's case alone showed 2 surgeries billed to senior, the same 2 surgeries billed to Blue Cross, follow-up treatments billed to Medicare. The boy was 7. The volume of claims was impossible. But the documentation made it plausible enough that nobody had questioned it until now. Nobody except a Navy intelligence officer pretending to be a nurse, pulling files in the middle of the night with hands that remembered how to leave no digital footprint. She photographed everything. Her phone camera, encrypted through naval networks, invisible to civilian IT, captured each screen. Each invoice. Each date mismatch. Each impossible volume. The kind of evidence that didn't just end careers. It ended them in federal courtrooms with prison time attached. But gathering evidence and surviving in this hospital were becoming incompatible goals. Mercer was accelerating. She could feel it in the way he watched her now, the way his eyes lingered when she passed. He knew she knew something. Not what. But enough to accelerate his timeline. By the time she had enough documentation to hand to the federal agents who were her actual supervisors, Mercer might have already found a way to remove her permanently. And if she was gone, if her credibility was destroyed first, the evidence would arrive with questions. Who compiled this? A vindictive nurse with a termination record? Why should anyone trust it? The hospital at night was a different place. The daytime chaos, the visitors, the rounds, the constant motion, gave way to something quieter and more dangerous. The 0300 hours shift was when the truly sick emerged. The ones whose bodies chose these hours to betray them. The ones who coded while visiting hours were locked down and families were asleep in their cars in parking lots. Ashley knew these hours. Had operated in darkness for long enough that daylight felt like the lie and this humming fluorescent quiet, felt like the truth. She closed the files at 0357 hours. Filed them carefully. Left no trace. The unit patch inside her jacket lining felt heavier than it should have, a weight made entirely of invisible history. The faded Navy emblem, pulled from a destroyed Humvee in Kandahar 3 years ago, had become her anchor to the person she wasn't supposed to be. It had kept her grounded through 18 months of watching a child who didn't know her name recover his eyesight through experimental neural regeneration therapy that should have bankrupted his family but instead was being paid for by insurance fraud. The irony wasn't lost on her. Mercer's crimes were funding Marcus's treatment. Remove the fraudulent billing and the treatment protocol disappeared. Stay silent about the fraud and a thief kept his medical license. She left the records room at 0404 hours and walked through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed their mechanical lullaby. In the break room, she poured herself water from a pitcher and didn't drink it. Just held the cup with hands that had held lives together on battlefields where the sound of helicopters meant either rescue or incoming fire, and there was never much difference between the two. By 14:30 hours that Friday, everything would change. The monitor flatlined at 1,430 hours. One sustained note. No rhythm. No hope. Marcus Voss lay motionless on the exam table during what was supposed to be routine follow-up imaging, a simple consultation, his bandaged eyes still healing, his small body finally stable after 3 weeks of neurological recovery. Then his O2 sat crashed. Then his pressure tanked. Then nothing. 6 doctors materialized within seconds. Residents, attendings, the chief of pediatric cardiology, all converging on the 7-year-old boy like predators sensing weakness in prey. The room filled with voices, bodies pressed against the metal rails of the stretcher, hands reaching, monitors screaming. Dr. Mercer pushed through them all. His voice cut like a scalpel through soft tissue, "Get me a crash cart. Epi. We need an epi now. Someone push compressions." No, stop compressions. I said stop. We need imaging first. Get a portable ultrasound. Move it. The team froze for half a second, collective confusion settling like ash. Another order contradicted the first. Chest compressions, people. What are you waiting for? Start them now. Hard and fast. 200 compressions per minute. Then, before anyone touched Marcus's chest, wait. Stop. Hold compressions. If we fracture his ribs, we compromise respiratory function. Imaging first. Precious seconds evaporated. The monitor continued its flatline song. O2 was cratering, already down to 54, dropping like a stone through dark water. The 6 doctors stood paralyzed, waiting for Mercer to give an order he wouldn't hold long enough to follow, their hands useless, their training overridden by the command structure that was collapsing in real time. 20 seconds of this. 30. 40. Then Ashley was moving. She didn't ask permission. Didn't wait for hierarchy. Her hand simply moved, muscle memory taking over, the kind of muscle memory that doesn't come from a nursing textbook but from a sand-colored phi base in Kandahar where a SEAL commander took shrapnel to the left thorax and the only thing standing between him and exsanguination was a 21-year-old captain with a Benchmade knife and 7 minutes before the Black Hawk came in. She pulled the knife from her scrub pocket, a small folding knife with a serrated edge, the blade catching fluorescent light, and she didn't hesitate. Didn't breathe. Didn't check with anyone. The intercostal space. Second rib, mid-clavicular line. She found it on Marcus's small body with the precision of someone who'd done this before, who'd felt for it in the dark with incoming fire, who knew the anatomy of human bodies in ways that had nothing to do with lectures and everything to do with survival. The blade went in clean. Air hissed out, not a whisper but a definitive release of pressure, the sound of space being created where space was crushing a small boy's heart. The emergency needle decompression. But that wasn't it. That wasn't enough. Ashley's hands moved again, muscle and memory working as one organism. She repositioned the blade, found the left anterolateral thorax, and opened the pericardium, crack thoracotomy, the procedure that turns a closed chest into an open battleground, the procedure that lives in the gray space between medicine and surgery, between desperation and salvation. One of the residents actually gasped. Blood. Fluid. Not the darkness of hemorrhage but the golden clarity of a pericardial effusion, the fluid that had slowly strangled Marcus's heart, that 7 specialists on 7 different imaging studies had somehow missed, that had been crushing his ventricles with every passing hour until his heart simply stopped trying. Ashley's fingers found the fluid, drained it with the precision of someone who'd held more lives together than most trauma surgeons would see in a career. Get me something to keep the pericardium open, she said. Her voice had changed. Drop 2 octaves. The deferential nurse was gone. The words weren't a question, they were a command. Retractor. Now. The chief resident moved without thinking. The monitor changed. A single blip. Then another. Then rhythm, actual, beautiful, sinus rhythm climbing like a climber ascending toward light. O2 starting to rise. 62, 71. 84, Marcus's small chest heaving with borrowed breath, with the gift of someone who couldn't let him die, who wouldn't let bureaucracy and hesitation and contradictory orders seal this child's grave. Marcus gasped. His eyes, still bandaged but alive behind those bandages, moved beneath the gauze. His mouth opened. He was breathing. Actually breathing. Conscious. Present. The room went dead silent. Dr. Mercer stared at Ashley's hands. At the blood. At the Benchmade knife lying on the sterile field like an accusation. Then his face transformed. Not relief. Calculation. A predator understanding that the threat had shifted, that the kill was off the table, but the opportunity wasn't. His voice shook when he spoke, with rage, not gratitude, everyone out. Now. Except Cooper. The room emptied like a tide pulling back from shore. Bradley Voss, who'd been standing in the corner, still calling his son's name, was escorted out by security. Marcus reached for the space where Ashley had been, his small hand grasping at nothing, his voice confused and frightened. Angel? Angel, where? Right here, buddy, Ashley said, and she squeezed his hand once before stepping back from the table. She closed the Benchmade knife with a soft click. The blade disappeared. But the evidence remained: blood on her scrubs, blood on her hands, the weight of what she'd done settling like lead across her shoulders. Dr. Mercer's mask had fallen completely. His eyes were pure predator now, all the social performance stripped away, all the careful competence revealed as cover for something else entirely, a man who'd just realized his fraud operation was about to be saved and destroyed simultaneously by the same act. "What the hell are you?" he asked. Ashley said nothing. Just cleaned her hands with deliberate slowness, the blood rinsing down the sink in pale spirals, her movements controlled, her breathing level, her composure holding steady while everything else shattered. "That was a thoracotomy," Mercer continued, his voice picking up speed now, words tumbling faster. "With a pocket knife. In a pediatric ward. You just ended your career, Cooper. You understand that? You performed emergency surgery without authorization. Without credentials displayed. You brought a weapon into a restricted pediatric area. You practiced medicine without a license." He pulled his phone out, his fingers moving across the screen with vicious speed, his breathing ragged now. This was stage 7, the desperate stage, the moment when a competent predator realizes he's trapped and starts throwing everything at the walls to see what sticks. "I'm filing emergency complaints with the State Board of Nursing," he said, reading as he typed. "Hospital Administration. State Police. Norfolk PD. Maybe federal, I'll let my attorney figure that out. Practicing medicine without a license. Unauthorized surgical procedures in a pediatric setting. Bringing weapons into a restricted area. Assault. Endangering a minor. I've got 43 pages of documentation drafting right now. Security is clearing your locker. You're done, Cooper. Finished. Walk out of this hospital at end of shift and never walk back in." Ashley looked at him. Just looked at him. Her eyes were grey-blue and perfectly still, the way eyes become when they've seen the worst of what humans can do and decided that mercy isn't weakness but clarity. "Is Marcus stable?" she asked. "Get out." "Is he stable?" "Out." She left. Didn't argue. Didn't defend. Just walked out of the pediatric wing with blood still under her fingernails, with the weight of 18 months of intelligence work crystallizing into this single moment, Marcus alive because she couldn't let a child die, and her entire cover operation disintegrating because she'd chosen breathing over protocol. Within 90 minutes, she stood in the third-floor hallway outside her locker as 2 security guards emptied it completely. Locker 47. The small space that had held her cover life for 18 months. Her personal items went into a cardboard box, the jacket with the faded 2nd Marine Division patch sewn into the lining, 3 books about pediatric neurology, a photo frame empty of pictures, her employee badge already deactivated. The walk down the corridor felt like running a gauntlet. Former colleagues avoided her eyes. Nurses she'd worked beside for a year and a half suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The Whisper network was already moving. Had she really used a knife? What kind of nurse carried a knife? What was she thinking? What would the hospital do? What would the State Board do? By 2200 hours, after the official termination meeting where she signed severance papers without reading them, Ashley was in the hospital laundry room, the only place empty enough for privacy, the only place where no one would think to look for an unemployed nurse who'd just destroyed her own career. She folded her scrubs one final time. Each sleeve creased with parade ground precision, corners sharp enough to cut, the muscle memory of 20 years in uniform converting grief into geometry. The faded 2nd Marine Division patch was visible now as she folded the jacket, the patch she'd sewn into the lining 18 months ago, the only piece of her actual identity she'd carried into this cover. 18 months. 18 months of documentation, evidence building, Bradley Voss's fraud investigation, the insurance scheme unraveling, Marcus's blindness being slowly reversed under legitimate medical care because she'd found the right neurologist underneath all of Mercer's garbage. All of it was gone now. Classified. Exposed. Burned. But Marcus was alive. Her hands finally began to shake as she set the folded scrubs into the return bin. Not fear. Not panic. The trembling that comes from adrenaline finally leaving the system, from the moment when the mission ends and you realize what it cost. She touched the unit patch, ran her finger along the stitching, and the image came unbidden, Bradley Voss's blood soaking through her uniform in Kandahar, his weight across her shoulders during that 2-mile carry, his delirious voice repeating Angel 6, while she ran through crossfire that turned the sand orange with tracer fire. That same SEAL commander's son, blind and terrified, now alive because she couldn't watch him die behind bureaucratic incompetence and a predator's profit margin. Clean conscience. Mission failure. But the scales felt balanced now. She walked out of St. Michael's Hospital at midnight, no badge, no access, no cover. Just Ashley Cooper, unemployed, officially disgraced, her career in ruins, her identity blown to hell. But alive. And that was enough. The parking lot was empty except for her truck. The rain had stopped sometime during the evening, leaving everything slick and gleaming under the sodium lights. She threw the cardboard box onto the passenger seat and sat in the darkness for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, listening to the rain dripping from the gutters onto the hood, the sound like applause for a show nobody was watching. Security cleared her locker while she stood silent in the hallway, watching 18 months of intelligence work evaporate like breath on cold glass. The officer, a man named Torres with a nameplate she'd never learned, didn't meet her eyes as he sealed the cardboard box with evidence tape. Her phone. Her encrypted tablet. The laminated parking pass. The items that comprised the visible life of a pediatric nurse named Ashley Cooper. Not the life she'd actually lived. Not the one that mattered. Torres handed her the box. She took it without speaking, her hand steady as a surgical laser, and walked toward the elevator while staff members she'd worked beside for a year and a half pretended not to watch. Nobody called after her. That was the unspoken rule with fired employees: acknowledge them and you acknowledge the possibility it could happen to you. Better to simply let them disappear. The elevator doors hissed shut, and she was alone with the fluorescent lights and their steady hum, the soundtrack to her own erasure. The hospital laundry room smelled like bleach and industrial detergent, sharp enough to sting the back of her throat. She folded her scrubs methodically at 2,247 hours, creasing each sleeve with the precision of someone who'd made 1,000 hospital corners in field tents across 3 continents. The blue fabric was soft from 100 washings, worn at the shoulders in the particular way that happens when you've carried things heavier than cloth. She laid out 7 pairs. That's what she'd stolen over 18 months, the regulation minimum, rotating them through the wash so nobody would notice. Now she folded each one slowly, deliberately, pressing the creases sharp enough to cut. Her jaw worked once, twice, but nothing came out. Pain was information. This pain said, mission failure. This pain said, the boy stays sick. This pain said, 18 months of standing in that pediatric wing, watching Marcus Voss's eyes wander sightless across hospital walls, watching his father trying not to flinch when the child asked why he couldn't see, watching Dr. Mercer order unnecessary procedures that padded his insurance billings while the child deteriorated, all of it erased. All of it for nothing. She reached the bottom of the locker where she'd kept the jacket. The 2nd Marine Division patch was still there, sewn into the lining with field stitches made by her own hands in a phi base outside Kandahar 3 years prior. She'd smuggled it in as a talisman, a piece of the person she actually was. Now she held it for a long moment, feeling the stitches, remembering the hands that had placed them, her hands, younger, steadier, before Norfolk, before the mask. She folded the jacket carefully and placed it on top of the scrubs. When she closed the laundry room door behind her, she didn't lock it. There was nothing left worth protecting. The background check came back on Tuesday morning at 0609 hours, and by 0630, the hospital administrator's face had gone the color of old bone. The flagged security alerts arrived first, automated DOD notifications, classified keywords, security clearance verification requests bouncing directly to Pentagon email servers. His secretary called him 3 times before he answered. She'd never heard him speak that way before, voice smaller, like a man discovering the floor beneath him was actually a very long drop. By 09:45, a naval intelligence officer sat across from him in the executive conference room, a woman with captain's rank on her uniform and eyes that had seen things he would spend the rest of his life trying not to imagine. She carried a folder marked confidential and spoke about embedded operations and credentialing protocols and the specific federal crimes associated with interfering with active intelligence personnel. The administrator's hands shook as he listened. Somewhere in the hospital, Dr. Mercer was checking on patients, unaware that his career was already over. It just hadn't stopped moving yet. The conference room was on the 3rd floor, East Wing, the same room where the hospital held death notification meetings with families. Commander Bradley Voss walked through the door at 1305 hours wearing his navy dress whites, his presence making the air pressure change like the moment before a thunderstorm. His face was a study in controlled fury, the kind of fury that came from 7 years of watching his son deteriorate while his own hands were tied by regulations that forbade him from asking questions about a medical facility he couldn't personally audit. He stood at the head of the table without being invited to sit. Dr. Mercer's face was already transitioning through its defensive phases, denial first, then righteousness, then calculation. He opened his mouth to speak, but Bradley held up one hand. Just one hand. Silence fell like a dropped weight. From the hallway outside, a small voice drifted through the open door, Angel 6. The room froze. Marcus was in his wheelchair in the corridor, held there by a hospital orderly who looked confused. The child's blind eyes pointed toward the direction of the door, toward his father, toward something only he could recognize. Angel 6? Marcus repeated, his voice smaller the second time, uncertain. Bradley's expression shifted, just for a moment, the fury cracked and something beneath it, something that looked like grief, showed through. He turned to Ashley, who was standing against the back wall, and his eyes held hers for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, 18 months collapsed into pure recognition. He knew. He'd always known, maybe, on some level that soldiers carry in their bones. That this woman had carried him 2 miles through Kandahar with Taliban fire walking the line of trees behind them. That his son had recognized her voice before her face. That his tattoo, the one with her call sign inked on his forearm, was more than just a name. It was a promise kept. "Sir," Bradley said, his voice dropping to the register he used for operational briefs. "Meet Captain Ashley Cooper. Naval Intelligence. 3 tours. She saved my life in Kandahar. And she just saved yours." He gestured toward Dr. Mercer, whose face had gone slack. A 2-star admiral walked through the door 60 seconds later. Just walked in, no announcement, no permission needed. He was a small man, the kind of small that came from being so thoroughly dangerous that size became irrelevant. His presence occupied more space than his body should have. He stopped Mercer mid-sentence with a single look, the kind of look that made generals rethink their decisions about funding. "Sit down, Doctor," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command, the kind that moves international vessels and redirects military operations. Mercer Saturday. The admiral moved to stand beside Ashley, and without any preamble, without any hesitation, he rendered a formal salute. His hand rose to his temple with military precision, the gesture that means respect earned through blood. His eyes locked on the Navy Cross mounted on Ashley's dress uniform, the medal she was wearing for the first time in 18 months. The medal Mercer had seen listed in her personnel file and thought was ceremonial, decorative, something a desk jockey wore to ceremonies. The admiral held the salute for exactly 5 seconds. Then he spoke to the room. "This is Captain Ashley Cooper, United States Navy, Naval Intelligence Directorate. Bronze Star, 2012, Paktia Province. Silver Star, 2014, Logar Province. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy Cross, 2015, Kandahar Province. Her service record is classified above your clearance level, Dr. Mercer. What is not classified is your conduct. A Pentagon liaison entered carrying a tablet and a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. She was younger than Ashley expected, maybe 35, with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent the last 6 hours making phone calls about medical fraud and intelligence operations. Operation Shepherd Glass, she said, and the word seemed to echo. Code name for a long-term medical intelligence operation, approved at the deputy director level, Navy Intelligence, running for 23 months at this facility. Captain Cooper was embedded to monitor a military dependent with security implications. The operation was compromised this morning when Dr. Mercer's background check demand triggered automatic notifications. She placed the tablet on the table. On the screen was Mercer's email history, every message he'd sent to insurance companies, every request for Marcus's records, every procedure order with duplicated billing codes highlighted in red. 7 pediatric cases. $847,000 in fraudulent billing. 3 separate insurance claims per patient. TRICARE. Private carriers. Fabricated NIH research grants. 14 pediatric surgeries that were medically unnecessary. All coordinated by this individual. She looked at Mercer the way a soldier looks at a mine that didn't detonate. You kept that child sick for profit. Captain Cooper's intervention in his emergency treatment, though unconventional, was tactically sound and saved his life. Your subsequent complaint against her was retaliation. The liaison paused. It's also a federal crime under Title 18, Section 1505. Retaliation against a federal witness. The next part happened fast. Federal agents entered like they'd been standing outside the door waiting for the word. They were real, FBI credentials, field jackets, the kind of presence that meant something had crossed from hospital administrator territory into actual law enforcement. They read Mercer his rights while his face cycled through expressions like a broken projector, denial first, then rage, then the particular hollow look of a man watching his entire life get deleted. You attempted to alter Captain Cooper's credentialing records in the State Medical Board database, one of the agents said, reading from a document. Tuesday night, 2,156 hours, you used your administrator credentials to access the state licensing system. You initiated 7 false disciplinary entries, backdated to 2022. Attempted to falsify her nursing license history. Our cyber division has timestamps, keystroke logs, IP addresses, and geolocation data from your personal laptop. Mercer tried to stand. The Admiral didn't move, but something in his posture made Mercer sit back down. You did this because Captain Cooper's documentation was too detailed, too careful, too precise, the liaison continued. She was seeing patterns. Insurance codes that didn't match procedures. Medication orders that didn't correlate with diagnoses. You manufactured a hostile work environment to drive her out before she could report it. When she saved that child's life in that emergency situation, you tried to destroy her credibility and erase the record of her presence. Federal record falsification is a felony charge, Doctor. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud is another. We're looking at approximately 8 to 12 years. Security entered, real security, federal agents with badges and a sense of professional distance. They took Mercer's arm with the kind of gentleness that actually made it worse, like they were respectful of his humanity while simultaneously ending his life. They walked him toward the door, reading additional charges as they moved. Outside the conference room windows, 2 hospital staff members, Dr. Rahman and Dr. Keiko, stood with coffee cups frozen halfway to their mouths. They'd been the ones who'd laughed at Ashley by the vending machines, who'd mocked her credentials, who'd validated Mercer's campaign against her. They watched him pass, and their expression cycled through the same arc as his had: denial, rage, comprehension, horror. The perp walk happened in the main corridor at 1,520 hours. Television cameras were waiting outside. The hospital PR team had called ahead once they understood the magnitude. Dr. Mercer in handcuffs, his expensive Italian shoes clicking on the linoleum floor with a sound like a timer counting down, walking past the pediatric wing where Marcus Voss had spent 7 years of his life going blind under his care. The news vans caught every step. 3 states would broadcast this image by evening. His medical career, 32 years of it, ending in 60 seconds of video that would be searchable forever. The camera flashes looked like muzzle fire. That was probably intentional. Ashley watched from the 3rd-floor hallway, standing beside Commander Voss. Marcus was between them, his small hand in each of their hands, his restored vision tracking the scene with the literal clarity of a child who couldn't quite understand what he was seeing but understood it was important. Bradley's jaw was set. He didn't smile. But something in his shoulders released, like a weight he'd carried for 18 months had finally been set down. Sometimes, he said quietly, justice actually happens. Ashley nodded. She didn't speak. Behind them, through the window of the CNO liaison's temporary office, she could see something mounted on the wall, a frame, new, wood grain catching the afternoon light. The 2nd Marine Division patch. Her patch. The one from the laundry room. Someone had retrieved it and mounted it properly, the field stitches now part of the official record. A trophy. Evidence. Proof that she'd been here. 6 months later, the pediatric wing of St. Michael's Hospital in Norfolk hummed with the kind of activity that meant healing. The morning sun came through the eastern windows, turning everything golden. At 0800 hours precisely, Marcus Voss ran down the hallway, actually ran, no wheelchair, no hesitation, his eyes tracking the movement of his own feet with wonder. His vision was restored after surgery performed by 3 surgeons who'd reviewed his actual condition for the first time without Mercer's interference. Marcus crashed into Ashley's legs as she stepped out of the elevator, his small arms wrapping around her waist. She steadied him, her hands gentle, her face, the real face now, not the masked one, showing something like joy. "Captain," Marcus said, using the title she'd asked him to use in private. "Did you see? I can run. I can see. I can run and see at the same time." "I see," Ashley said. Literally and figuratively. Her mouth twitched. Just slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing. Commander Voss appeared with coffee, handing her one without asking. The particular ease of people who'd survived something together. They stood in careful proximity, not touching, the weight of Kandahar and recognition and 3 years still too much to rush. But Marcus provided easy territory, chattering about his new baseball team, about his school, about the normal 7-year-old life that had been stolen from him and then returned. Through the hospital window, Marcus spotted something in the parking lot. A medical supply van, blue and white, with a man in a uniform loading cardboard boxes. Marcus squinted, his newly restored vision crystallizing on details. "Is that?" Ashley confirmed the question before he could finish it. "Yes." That was Dr. Mercer. Federal sentence, 5 years. Reduced to 3 with cooperation. Medical license, permanently revoked. Restitution ordered, $2.4 million. Current employment, medical supply delivery driver, $16 per hour, the only work his probation allowed. He loaded boxes slowly, methodically, the kind of work that required no thinking. The kind of work that left your hands free to remember what you'd lost. Marcus watched for a moment, then looked away. "Why do we care about him?" the child asked. Bradley knelt down. "Because," he said, "sometimes you need to see what happens when you hurt people. You need to understand that the world keeps moving even after you've tried to stop it." Ashley placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. Later that afternoon, in the courtyard of St. Michael's Hospital, a ceremony was being set up. Folding chairs. A podium. A banner reading, "Pediatric Care Oversight Initiative, honoring our military families." 7 military-dependent children would attend. 14 parents. News crews. People who'd been damaged by Mercer's greed and were now watching the system that had failed them actually work to repair something. Ashley stood in her dress whites, the Navy cross visible against her chest. She was introduced as Naval Intelligence Medical Liaison to the hospital, a position created specifically to prevent another Mercer from ever using a military family as a profit source. She gave a brief speech. Nothing elaborate. Nothing theatrical. Just her voice, carrying across the courtyard, steady as a surgical laser. We often think of warriors as people who carry guns. But sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. Sometimes they wear scrubs instead of uniforms. Sometimes they save lives one patient at a time in fluorescent light instead of on battlefields. I'm here today because I was allowed to be myself. Because someone trusted the truth eventually. Because a 7-year-old boy never gave up on his vision, even when 7 doctors did. That matters. That has to matter. Because if it doesn't, then what's any of this for? The applause was immediate and genuine. Marcus beamed from the front row, holding his father's hand, able to see the woman who'd carried his father home and then saved his sight. Bradley watched her with an expression that would take another lifetime to fully decode. In the parking lot behind the hospital, the medical supply van was still there. Dr. Mercer loaded boxes, and sometimes, during his shift, he could hear the applause drifting over the building. He never turned around. He just kept loading, one box at a time, understanding finally what he'd never understood before, that his name would be remembered at St. Michael's not for his credentials or his career, but for the exact moment he'd stopped mattering. If you're enjoying this, smash that like button. And answer me this: would you have signed the NDA and taken the money, or fought back? Comments are open.